process change in their facilities requires a lot more technology, a lot more infrastructure, and all those things for companies like us are fantastic because that's what we bring to the table. And you know, the life cycle of these plants is very long. If you look at a big petrochemical facility, it's going to operate for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. So those investments, once they make them, they're there for generations. If you consider the United States, who hasn't built a refinery since the early 70s in the United States, and all the refineries in the U.S. are still operating, it's remarkable the life cycle of those facilities. So that's why our businesses are continue to be strong.
So yeah, it's not just selling the equipment, it's the service relationship that could go on for a generation.
That's right. And because the equipment today, the clients, they expect the equipment to run continuously for 7 to 9 years before they take it down to do any maintenance. So that's a remarkable engineering feat and a manufacturing feat, and that's what the customers have come to expect is, yeah, that's normal.
So they want the reliability out of the gate, then you have to stand behind the product for the long run. Devesh, how about from your standpoint, when you're looking at the Middle East right now, what kind of questions are you asking that you think are important?
Well, excuse me, I think, as Michael said, the way each market is evolving, there's a big transition time right now, and as I mentioned earlier, there's the opportunities are growing because of the complexity and the desire of the region to ship end product, but the bar is going to be raised higher as well. And you know, one example I can give you is, 20 years ago it was, even 10 years ago it was easy to bid on equipment completely shipped out of the United States and win the business. And today, because of the drive for localization, you have to increase your indigenous content. You have to, the successful companies in the future are going to be the ones that can balance localization with external technology. And that's been a lot on our minds is what is our formula for this? How are we going to be successful at this? Because and it's worth doing because for all the reasons Michael just pointed out is we see a long pipeline of business in the Middle East. But the rules of how you execute it are changing. And that's the biggest thing on our mind right now. Are you finding that there's a supply chain that's ready to go, ready to provide that local content? Or is that something you actually have to work on and help them develop? It's a little bit of both. Certain things for, generally fabricated goods, there's a tremendous amount of local capability. And, the big trend, well, the region is dominated by oil and gas petrochemical, which are very high specification oriented industries. So what you find is that the very savvy companies are moving their centers of gravity for their oil and gas business and petrochemical business to the Middle East. They can service you better. So we're finding a better supply chain sometimes out of the Middle East than out west where some of our suppliers don't want to deal with the specifications for the Middle East, the very onerous high specification requirements of companies like Aramco or Sabic. Because they want these plants to operate 50, 60, 70 years, because of the high temperature, the corrosive sea water in the air, they have very, very high specifications that are very difficult to deal with, and the vendors locally are better at dealing with that than sometimes overseas.
Do you see the same thing? I mean, the standards of that can actually be higher over there? In terms of...
The standards are incredibly precise. Because the longevity of the equipment, how it's specified, the equipment is designed and engineered for that application. So every piece of equipment is unique, very voluminous. The specifications, I think you'd agree, sometimes 3-4 feet tall, might take 6 or 7 months just to prepare a bid based on the specifications, because they've specified materials, heat treatments, all sorts of minutia that are critical to that machine lasting 50 years. And not many people can do it, and and there's a reason for that, because the demands are very, very demanding.
I wonder, though, so where do these guys obviously operate mostly in the oil petrochemical space? You're seeing the same interest in local sourcing across other industries, and what is the shape of the supply chain there if indeed American companies are required to find those local sources?
Yeah, no, I think it's true across a variety of different sectors. I think these are dynamic, robust markets, and you can find a lot of good local partners, to source your supply chain. And, when you look at the Middle East too, think of it, not to generalize it, as I said not to, but think of it wherever you're doing business. It's really a great jumping board for Africa, India, these other markets that now with, a lot of these airlines that are based out of the region, they're flying all around the globe. So you can, I forget the stat, but it's staggering how many, the percent of the globe that you can touch, flying out of the Gulf. I mean, it's like 75, 80%. I mean, it's mind blowing. And if you do set up shop, in the Middle East, you can get to India, you can get to Asia, you can get to these African markets. So it's very interesting, kind of on that whole supply chain. But you can use it as a springboard into a lot of other markets as well.
So it's not just the Middle East sort of as a destination market that you're going to sell into, it's a gateway market in some ways.
Absolutely.
If you have a beachhead there, you can use it. Do you use it in that way, Aquatech?
Yeah, sure. We have a lot of technical folks based in the Middle East, and when they have slack time in their schedules, because it's very cyclical on how maintenance is done in these plants, we send them to other countries. We send them to Asia. We send them to the European continent because they're highly skilled, highly trained, and they're very good resources to use. So for us, it's more of a people resource than a component or product resource.
Well, they have to be based somewhere to supply your market.
That's
so
right.
With the access, that makes the case. So from Aquatech's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Dubai is a great center and a beachhead for us. You can get on a plane and you can go to Shanghai, Guangzhou, Beijing, you can go to India, you can go to New York, you can go to Houston. We do have a base staff there that supports a lot of regions around the world, not just for the Middle East, and we are planning it to be. It's almost like 20, 30 years ago, the trend in business was you'd have Europe and the Middle East kind of together, the way a company was oriented. It's kind of the reverse now. We service Europe out of the Middle East rather than service the Middle East out of Europe.
Wow. Okay, that's a real sea change. Well, I interact a lot with folks in the oil and gas, or gas primarily, here in petrochemical industry in Pittsburgh, and I know especially the global companies put a huge premium on safety and practices, a safety culture. They want to hire people locally who have that ethic. Do you find that's easy to come by in the Middle East, Mike?
It's becoming a lot easier. The safety in the facilities and how they operate, I would say it's world class in the Middle East. They're very cognizant of what they need to do and how they need to do it. Before we approach a site, there's a lot of pre-work that goes into what's the safety plan, how are you going to handle health, safety, and environmental issues, and they're very, very strict. I would say they're as strict as the United States when we do work in country here. So I have no issues or qualms about sending my folks into any facility there.
But it sounds like you do ask the question up front, though,
Of
even
course.
though you have confidence, right?
Yeah. And there's the safety of the work that we do, and then there's just the safety of the region. As you indicated, there's some places where it's a little dicier than others, but as long as you have a good safety plan and the right security teams available, there's no issues.
Well, Steve, let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah, that type of safety, I think, is probably the one more than anything else that would have a chilling effect on the interest of American companies in investing over the Middle East.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's really important to think beyond the headlines. I would say the vast majority of the Middle East, I'm from Washington, D.C., or that's where I am now, and I would rather walk down the streets of Erbil or pick your city than Southeast Washington at night, to be honest with you. So yes, it's important to do your due diligence and be aware, but I don't think that safety should prevent any U.S. company from doing business in the Middle East. I think it's very safe, and the people there, again, to generalize, are incredibly welcoming, and they really, again, to stress the point, they want to do business with American companies. So they're going to bend over backwards, I think, to really accommodate you and make you feel at home. Now, of course, there are certain parts, yeah, that you need to take some extra steps. But even in places like that, I think there are opportunities. But the vast majority of the Middle East, I think, is incredibly safe and open for business.
Is that a hurdle, though? I wonder. Think about your employees, particularly if it's Americans and you want them to go over there. You want to base them there for on. You want them to take their families. Do you have to sell them more on the Middle East because of these, what we see in the media here in the United States? Is it, and how do you get over that hurdle?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think the expat life is a personality driven. So I think the individual doesn't have to be sold that much as long as, and many of them don't take their families with them. They take an overseas assignment for 1, 2, 3 years, and with home visits and leave, they accommodate that way. But I think the expat life is personality driven rather than I have to sell them on this particular country to go to.
So you just have a person, they want to do that. They want to go overseas, they want to do business. Yeah. That's how they see their career unfolding.
It's a great career assignment. It's a great experiential assignment, culturally as well as professionally. So generally, I have no problem sending somebody.
Yeah.
It depends. For the most part, the whole idea of the expat life is reducing as time goes on. More companies are hiring locally, and that's also what we're looking at. And sometimes you find someone who is originally from the region that has worked in the United States for most of his career and wants to go back, is excited to go back. I agree with Michael from that point of view. You have the people that like excitement that go and want to be on the expat side. But that's a little different. That's kind of the business management side. You're basically living out of Dubai or Abu Dhabi, and you're traveling in the region. Actually, I personally did that for 7 years, earlier in the decade. So that's kind of the glamorous side of things. Where we do have a bit of the challenge is on the service side, and it depends on the country. Because of what happened with Egypt several years ago, there were some questions. We were doing a lot of business in Egypt. So you do have to sell people sometimes. You need to go for a project meeting this time. You need to go visit the client. The client's not going to keep coming here. And there's some hesitation, but pretty much 100% of the time we find if somebody makes one visit, they come back with a totally different impression and they have no problem, because what's in their minds is what's in the newspaper, but when they go there, they see something totally different. There are exceptions. We do have some challenges bidding into Iraq right now because we have a lot of people who say that why should we bid this, because I'm not going there. You can't send me there to service this equipment. And the company's view on that is that this is a market, this is someplace we're going to have to do business. If we're not going to make anybody do what they don't want to do, but we have a huge employee base potential within the region that would gladly, So you have to focus on training and look at to each his own, basically.
So that's how you get around it. If you need to be in Iraq, you need to bid for that business. You don't want to pass it up. But if you can't get Americans to do it, then you have to source people from within the region who have a comfort level.
Absolutely.
Willing to do it.
Absolutely.
I wanted to see on this whole issue. We always hear American companies putting their toes in the water in China and how terrified they are of intellectual property issues. Gosh, do I send a product over there and then it's being copied? Are there any of those kinds of risks in the Middle East, or does it once again, I'm painting with a broad brush, but are intellectual property rights respected?
I would say intellectual property, that's a global issue. And it's certainly something you have to be cognizant of, and it's something we at the Chamber and our friends in governments here in the U.S. It's always on our policy kind of to-do list. It's something that we're always talking to our friends in government about. That it's really important to have a robust IP regime. If you want to attract a lot of investment, particularly in these knowledge-based sectors that you see a lot of countries diversifying into. It's incredibly important. So it's something it's always on our list of things that we're talking about. Because but it's not just the Middle East or country X or Y. It's certainly a challenge around the entire globe, I think. But it's very important that countries adopt very robust IP regimes and have that in place. to get that sort of investment that they're looking for.
Yeah, what's interesting is we did talk so much about healthcare and healthcare technology and those kinds of things, and I think there'd be enormous sensitivity to have that intellectual property protected.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one of the kind of enabling conditions that companies look at. Going back to the regulatory regime that each country adopts, that's certainly, I think, top of mind. How do they treat intellectual property? What's in place, to prevent IP theft, to go after those that commit violations, those sorts of things. It's certainly a big consideration, I would say.
I'm thinking about Aquatech and Elliott is playing in the petrochemical oil and gas space to a large degree. You guys asking questions these days about the price of oil and gas and the implications for the opportunities there? Is that on your mind?
Every day. For us, it's kind of good news, bad news. The bad news is price of oil is down. It's going to be that way for probably 3 to 5 years, I'm guessing. That hurts capital spending on new plants, new projects. Everybody sees in the paper a lot of delays in cutting of capital spending by the big oil companies. But on the service side, that's good news, because that means they need to run the plants longer. They need to make sure they're doing their maintenance, buying parts, doing minor service and overhaul. So it's kind of a yin and yang for us. But service business is very good. New capital equipment is going to be soft for a couple of years.
Yeah, I wonder, so in the mix of your revenue, how much is sort of new equipment, how much is service?
For us, in the old days, it used to be 75% new, 25% service. Now we've changed our business model. We're more than 50% service and 50% new equipment. So that's a great mix, because new equipment, it's always a dogfight. Your margins are thin. On the service side is, for the next 40 years, is where you kind of make that up. So it's critical for us.
Devesh?
Yeah, very similar. The low oil prices have slowed down a lot of capital expenditure. Although we have a burgeoning service business, we're a little more majority on the capital equipment side, so that is of concern. But the surprising thing is that there's a lot of projects still moving in the region. It's more like pre-oil price drop, 2010 to 14, it started getting overheated. There were artificially too many projects being developed. So you just have to know that and correct for that and manage that. But there's a lot of opportunities that come out of this. For example, with the lower oil prices and that correction taking place over the last several years, there's a need for higher technology, because there's less of a openness to subsidize power. Because when oil when you're making a lot of money selling oil overseas, you're subsidizing it locally, so you're not worried about the energy efficiency of some of the technologies you buy. Now there's oil prices have dropped, profits aren't what they used to be, so it's not so easy to subsidize this water, subsidize this power, and therefore I need more efficiency. I want better life cycle costs. This is opening up a lot of opportunities for companies with technology associated with these types of aspects of energy reduction and higher efficiencies to do better in the region.
Oh, that's fascinating. I would think there's an upside in this need for innovation. Just that it manifests itself in other industries as well, a sort of demand for better technology, better ways of doing things, and as an opportunity for American businesses.
Oh, absolutely. I think anything that's tech related, that's going to bring the latest and greatest, it's certainly a huge opportunity for U.S. companies, whether it's in renewable energy. You look across the region, there's a lot of IT hubs, and it's not just the large multi